Good day, and welcome to part 16 of our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. As we go through this, it's important to keep in mind about Solomon's position. He was a person who had known God intimately in his early days, and yet had been taken away from God through pagan influences, pagan philosophers, and the thought that other things were important in this world. And this is much the same as we are today. Many of us have gone to church, have been involved with God as a youth, and yet as we get older we get involved in our work, in our duties, in our possessions, and our own achievements, and we feel that God is no longer needed. And this is sort of the position that Solomon is in. He has done many things. He has accomplished much. He has obtained almost everything one could possibly want to obtain. And he's trying now he's trying to sort of organize in his own mind, or think in his own mind, is any of this really worth it without God? So he alternates back and forth in his philosophy about what really is important and what is the meaning of life. And as we go through these chapters, you can see that he often gives how futile much of what we do and what we obtain really is. And it comes back to the point of what happens with God. And this is what he is doing in this last part of chapter 6. For he says in verse 10, whatever one is, he has been named already, for it is known that he is man. This sounds like a confusing statement. But what he's really saying is put forward very good in the English translation of the Bible, which says, whatever has happened was foreordained, and what happens to man was also foreordained, foreknown. So that what he's saying is God already knew, has already had it planned, already knows what's going to happen, what really man needs and what's going to happen in his life. And Solomon has come back to this a number of times. At the end of chapter 2, he said that he hated all his labor because who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Who knows if a person's going to be really smart or really a fool? He says, nothing then is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor, that this was from the hand of God. At the end of chapter 5, he said the same thing. For it is good and fitting for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun, for all the days that God gives him, for it is his heritage. In other words, God gives man the ability to earn his living, to live his life. And he also gives him the ability to enjoy his life. And this is what Solomon is saying. It all ends up in God's hands. And now in the last part of chapter 6, he's saying essentially whatever has been, whatever is, it has been named, it has been done, it has been already foreordained. And man is part of that. Therefore, the New English translation puts it this way: whatever has happened was foreordained, and what happens to man was also foreknown. In other words, God has the ultimate authority and control of all of this. And then he goes on to the next verse and says, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. All man does is try to do something by himself. And in its essence, that is contending with God. God has the ultimate control, and man really should recognize this. And if we did, the world would be a much better place overall. Job recognized this back when he was going through his troubles, when Satan was testing him under God's authority. And he says this in chapter 33, verse 12. Look, In this you are not righteous, I will answer you. God is saying to Job, in this you are not righteous, I will answer you. For God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give an accounting of any of his words. For God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. In other words, God is in control. And no matter what we do, we can question him, we can ask him for answers, we can make implorations to him, we can make requests of him. But in the end, God is in control. And this is what he's saying here in verse 10. For man cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. In Romans, it puts it in this way, in chapter 9, starting in verse 20. But indeed, O man, who are you to reply against God? Will the thing formed say to him who formed it, why have you made me like this? Does not the potter have power over the clay? From the same lump to make one vessel for honor and another for dishonor. We have to understand that what we have been given has been given by God, and to be content with it, and to understand that we cannot actually fight against God or contend with him because he has the authority. After all, he is God and we are not. So what has been done, what is, has already been foreordained. And what's known of man has been foreknown by God. So why do we contend with him? Why does man try to make an argument or fight against God? He cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. Since there are many things that increase vanity, how is man the better? In other words, everything that we do, everything that we try to obtain, everything that we try to make our own way in, often is vanity. There are many ways in which one can fight a meaningless life. Or that life can be based on pride in one's actions, can actually be based on the pride in one's life rather than in the need of one's life. And therefore this pride or meaninglessness is also all vanity. And this is what Solomon is saying. Why do we contend against God? What has been done is already known. Man's future is foreknown. And therefore, since we cannot contend with God, why do it? There are many ways that we can make a meaningless, a pride-filled life without God, but that doesn't give meaning to life itself. For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life which he passes like a shadow. Life is fleeting. And if we continue in our way of only doing things for ourselves, of trying to accumulate more wealth, more possessions, more toys, more power, more prestige, to do something for the envy of others, to do something which really has no meaning, ultimate meaning in the world, because as Solomon said in verse 1, everything is the same as it has been since the beginning of time, essentially. Nothing really changes overall. Yes, there may be progress in some areas, there may be progress in many areas, but at the same time the basic aspects of life remain essentially unchanged. So, for all who knows what is good for man, parents often have trouble with their children, the same as God has trouble with us, because children want to do things their own way when they're not able to do it, are capable of doing it, are knowledgeable enough to do it. And sometimes it's difficult for parents to make children understand that. The same way it's difficult for God to make us understand the same principles. Therefore, who knows what is good for a man? God does, in him, in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? There are 4 main lessons in this. First of all, in verse 10, God has ordained life as he deems it to be. Secondly, there's no arguing with God. It's futile. There's no sense in arguing with him or trying to change him. He is God, we are not. The third thing, God is willing to bring a message, a meaning to our life. Who knows what is good for man? And the fourth thing is God is in charge of the future. It says here, who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? In Solomon's day, all that they knew was that sacrifices covered sin. They did not have the redemptive power of Christ in them, or Christ available to them, to bring them into an eternal salvation like we have today. So who will know what will happen after the sun? Who will know what will happen after him under the sun? What we do now. We know what can happen to us under the sun if we act and accept Christ as our Savior. So Solomon is saying that God does have an ultimate plan, and he is in charge of the future. There is a way in which this is put in Jeremiah 2, verse 11. It says, "For I know the thought that I think about you, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." This is what he really is referring to when he says, who can tell a man what will happen? John 12:10 puts it this way, "I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly." This is really what Solomon is saying in essence. We cannot have an abundant life. We do not have peace. We cannot have real meaning to our existence without God. Everything else that we do on our own ends up being essentially vanity for our own pride, and is in the end, as far as life is concerned, meaningless. So this is the end of chapter 6. We're now halfway through the book of Ecclesiastes. I hope you'll join me next week as we begin chapter 7. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.